Welcome to Red Hat Training. My name is George Hacker, and today we're going to be talking about SELinux modes and how you manage them on your system. In an earlier section, we talked about the three modes that SELinux provides: enforcing, permissive, and disabled. So the question we're going to look at today is, how do you manage those modes on your system? First, we're going to learn about the command that you use to display the mode that your system is currently using. The command that you use to do that is the get_enforce command. So I'm logged in as root, and if I type get_enforce, notice that it says my system is in enforcing mode. That means that when users try to access services on my machine, that SELinux will enforce the rules and prohibit them from accessing files that they're not allowed to access by the SELinux rules. To change that mode, I would use the set_enforce command. So if I type set_enforce without any arguments, it gives me a usage message that shows me the arguments that I'm supposed to give to that command. I can give either enforcing or permissive as words, or I can put a 0 or a 1. 1 means that I want enforcing to be active, or 0 means that I want to be in permissive mode. So since my system's in enforcing mode, I'm going to say set_enforce 0, and then I'm going to use get_enforce to redisplay my new settings, and I'll see that my system's in permissive mode. So that set_enforce 0 changed my current mode of SELinux, so that now, instead of prohibiting users from accessing files that the rules don't allow them access to, it'll simply log messages and allow them access anyway. Now, what if I reboot my machine? If I reboot my machine, the changes that I just made are not persistent. So to make those changes persistent, what I would do is I would modify a file called etc SELinux config. So I'm going to display that with the cat command. And we see that it's just a text file with a bunch of comments. But there are two lines that are very interesting for us. The first one has a variable that says SELinux equal enforcing. That defines the default mode that my system comes into when it boots. The other line that's active is SELinux type equal targeted. That line specifies which policy that my system's going to use when SELinux is activated. But the one that we're interested in is the SELinux enforcing. So if I were to edit that and change it to SELinux equal disabled or SELinux equal permissive, when I reboot my machine, that will be the default SELinux mode that my machine comes up in. When I use the set_enforce command, I can change it between enforcing and permissive mode. But the only way that I can completely turn SELinux off is if I change this file and I set SELinux equal to disabled and reboot my system. Now there's one other way that you can set the SELinux mode of your system, and that's when you boot the system up. So when your system boots, the bootloader will prompt you to choose what kernel you want to boot from. Normally it just times out and your system will boot into the default kernel that your system is configured to boot from. But what you can do is you can interrupt grub and you can edit the kernel line and specify which kernel you want to boot from. And we really don't want to change the kernel. We specify an SELinux equal parameter. If we specify SELinux equals 0, that turns SELinux completely off when we boot. And that overrides the setting that is in etc SELinux config that we saw earlier. If we specify SELinux equal 1, that will turn SELinux on, despite what that file's configuration is. So when our system boots, we can override the default settings that are specified in etc SELinux config. There is one other kernel line that we can specify, and that is enforcing equal 0 or 1. Enforcing equal 0 is typically how we would disable SELinux enforcing mode and make it go into permissive mode despite the default settings in etc SELinux config. So just to wrap up, There are three ways that we can manage SELinux modes when on our systems. One is we can use the get enforce and set enforce to look at how the current settings are and to manipulate them. The second way is we can make changes to a file called etc SELinux config, and that sets the default mode when our system boots. The third way we can do it is we can even override those default settings by specifying a kernel parameter, either SELinux or enforcing, that specifies how our system should come up when our system comes up.